Hello, darling. I was thinking some stuff, and it seemed worth sharing. I was thinking about whether or not I might be slightly on the spectrum. And I was thinking about the stories that we tell about ourselves. And I was thinking about the face we show the world. Words like neurodivergent and neurotypical are in wide usage these days, and have been for nearly 20 years. I have family members with diagnoses of ADHD, or dyspraxia, or bipolar disorder, and I regularly read posts online about the struggles involved in living with conditions like these. I also know people who do not have such a diagnosis, but who still exhibit the kind of symptoms and behaviours that make me suspect that they might obtain such a diagnosis if they sought one out. For myself, I have never sought such a diagnosis. I suspect that I might be slightly on the autistic spectrum, but I have a mild enough expression of it that I am able to get by fairly well, and have never needed to ask for any special accommodations from employers and the like. I know that I struggle sometimes with human relationships, like I have to work to do on purpose things that come naturally to other people. But I am aware that there's a potential paradox there. Maybe everyone else is just like me, working hard to conceal how much work it is for them. I think that I have a fairly flat affect as a default state, and that much of my more emotionally expressive behaviour is performative. I'm not suggesting that I don't have emotions, just that sometimes they don't announce themselves to me. I have to deliberately go looking for them and figure out what it is that I am feeling. Those are some of the things about me that make me think I might be slightly on the autistic spectrum. But there are lots of other autistic markers that I don't possess. One of the reasons that I've never sought a diagnosis is that I often read posts or articles by autistic people who clearly struggle far, far more than I do. Realising how tough things are for them makes me feel like an imposter. I'm certainly not alone, though, in thinking of myself as having a mild version of some neurodivergence. It's not uncommon these days to hear people claim to be a little bit OCD or a little bit ADHD. Part of the problem here is that many of the markers of these conditions are exaggerated versions of perfectly normal patterns of neurotypical behaviour. The stereotype of OCD sufferers is that they often need things to be neat or well organised. I do realise that OCD is actually far more complicated than that, but let's use it as an example. Liking things tidy is a very common human trait. There's a world of difference between someone who feels compelled to neaten things as long as they don't have something more important to be doing, and someone who feels a compulsion to neaten things and can't choose not to, regardless of what else they should be doing instead. I fully understand how frustrating it must be for someone whose life has been utterly derailed by some profound problem to then hear happy and successful people casually lay claim to the same thing and laugh it off. One of the benefits of having an actual diagnosis is the confirmation that you are not an imposter, that you are not just exaggerating this. It offers you a different narrative that you can incorporate into the story of who you are. There are other benefits to a diagnosis, of course. One advantage to having been confirmed as a member of a group is that other members of that group might have useful advice for you. Coping strategies that help them might be worth trying out for yourself. Coping strategies are something of a double-edged sword, though. Firstly, because someone who is seeking a diagnosis in later life has quite often developed a lot of coping strategies of their own. The catch-22 of this is that the better your existing strategies are, the harder it may be for you to obtain a diagnosis. Some of the diagnostic markers involve not coping with things, and so good coping strategies can mask how badly off you actually are. I have certainly seen interviews with people who were initially told, for example, that they couldn't be autistic because they could hold down a job and they had a boyfriend. In the mind of that medic, properly autistic people couldn't do that. The other problem with using coping strategies to mask as more neurotypical than you actually are is that this sort of masking requires effort, on top of the base level of effort already required to hold down that job or to maintain those relationships. Masking does certainly make you more widely employable, but it also leaves you more susceptible to burnout. This is partly because lots of things are genuinely harder for you than those who aren't having to mask at the same time. Also, of course, part of the point of the masking is to conceal how much you might be struggling with things. You are a more likely candidate for burnout because part of your core strategy is never admitting you're in trouble, even if you're actually on fire. The happiest stories that I read tend to be the ones where people are finally able to give up on masking. The freedom that they feel sounds like a revelation, although it can, of course, rely on them having an understanding workplace or being independently wealthy. They do still have access to their old masks, but only putting them on when absolutely necessary seems to reduce the cost of them, to lessen the damage that they cause. The wearing of masks has always been a very interesting metaphor to me. I spoke earlier about how many psychological conditions are exaggerated versions of something fairly typical. You don't need to have OCD to prefer a tidy workspace. You don't need to be bipolar to sometimes feel a bit manic or a bit depressed. I think also that you don't need to suffer from multiple personality disorder to sometimes have the feeling that there might be several different parts of yourself battling for control. Battling may be the wrong word. Most people seem to have achieved a state of détente between the different sides of themselves. Nevertheless, it is not uncommon to hear people talk about adopting a particular persona when in a professional environment, for example. Most of us don't think of that as a problem, nor do we think of our work persona as being in any way dishonest. It still feels like a facet of our true self, and employers don't mind us being performative in this way. Indeed, they are actively paying us to do so. I have read things by people who have found it very useful in their everyday life to categorize and identify the different personas that they have available to them. Constructing triggers that can help bring particular personas to the surface is a well-established life hack, like putting particular music on as a background doing some housework. So it can be beneficial sometimes to take stock of ourselves, to undergo a kind of mental inventory of what masks we have available and when each might be useful, and also what they might cost us. Adopting a particular persona may well be an effort. Recognizing the cost of masking is a key step in choosing to reduce that cost, which might sometimes be good for us. As for our true self, well, I go back and forth on that. There is one model that says our true self is the sum of all our personas, and another model that says that our true self is what's left when every mask is dropped. Both of those models can be useful. For myself, I find that I still adopt personas even when I'm entirely alone. I rather suspect that attempting to drop all of my personas would leave me suspicious that whoever was left might just be another mask that I'd cobbled together. It's not something that I spend time worrying about. I find masks a useful tool rather than a red flag, but that's just me. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about, and it felt worth sharing. See you soon.